Welcome to another episode of Was It That Bad, the series where we look at a game which reviewed poorly upon initial release and go back in time to answer the ultimate question, was it really that bad? Today we're looking at the PC version of Daikatana, released in the year 2000 by developer Ion Storm. We'll be playing version 1.2, which was the most recently released official version of the game, although there was a fan patch, more on that later. Now, back in the year 2000, the media was not kind to Daikatana, with popular outlets such as Eurogamer and GameSpot giving it a 5 and 4.6 out of 10 respectively. Fair to say, it wasn't the reception the developer or publisher had hoped for, and the sales data of the time also suggest it fell well short of expectations. As always, a massive thank you to those who support the channel. If you enjoy this type of content, please do consider subscribing. It helps support the channel and you can be notified of new content the moment it drops. With that out of the way, let's begin. When I first downloaded the game, I read the PDF manual because I wanted to understand more about the game, in particular the story. The manual gives a 2-page overview of the story, which after reading twice, I still couldn't quite understand, but I thought that's okay, I'm sure it'll make more sense when I start playing it. It didn't. In fact, the initial 10-minute cutscene is basically the manual text dump, just in cutscene form. If I think of every good FPS I've played, I could describe the story to someone in a sentence or two. For example, you play as a Marine sent to Mars to deal with a terrible threat. Or, you're a scientist involved in an experiment that goes wrong and you need to escape from the facility. I can't do that with Daikatana because the story is so complex and requires such overbearing suspension of belief around character motivation that it's honestly too complex to explain in this video. Let's just say you travel through time with a magical sword, trying to save the world for reasons that are never fully explored or explained. Remember those choose-your-own-adventure books? Imagine just reading the book from cover to cover. That's Daikatana's story. One of the biggest challenges I had in enjoying the story was the complete lack of character development. You're asked to care about random characters whom you just met as if they were your family, and then on the flip side, you're asked to massacre others who are just doing their job. There is very little narrative consistency here, and I ended up not caring about any of the characters, not the least the protagonist you play. Gameplay-wise, Daikatana is a first-person shooter with RPG elements and some platforming. Now this sounds good. Deus Ex, which released around the same time, was a similar genre and that was great. The difference is where Deus Ex blended all of these gameplay elements seamlessly, Daikatana doesn't really blend them at all, which gives a very unbalanced experience. Now, one thing I will say is good is the control. I never felt like I didn't have proper command over my character, and this was important in some of the platforming sections. But where this sentiment comes undone is the actual level design. You're frequently asked to make very precise platforming jumps or ascend ladders which are oddly placed and make exiting them without falling and potentially taking damage virtually impossible. This is also true for your companions, but I'll cover them shortly. The combat itself suffers an even worse fate. Through a combination of baffling design decisions, poor weapon design, and egregious clipping and physics issues, combat is a challenge and not the good kind. First, let's look at some of the questionable design decisions. The first weapon you pick up in the game is the Iron Blaster. It looks like your usual first-person shooter blaster, except that shots ricochet off most surfaces, meaning that if you shoot it in front of you, it'll ricochet back and damage you. Now, this might sound realistic, but it's not very fun in practice, particularly given it's literally the first weapon you get in the game. The next issue is you can't use it in water without damaging yourself, and guess what? A good chunk of the first level contains water segments. Another weapon curiously designed is the Shot Cycler, which is basically a shotgun. Only, it's not just one shot it fires, it's 6 shots in quick succession per trigger pull, then entering a lengthy reload sequence before it's ready to shoot another 6. Again, you receive this weapon fairly early on in the game, when most enemies that you'll find yourself close enough to use the Shot Cycler with go down in one shot anyway, and the enemies that don't are either highly mobile or not ones that you'd want to get that close to. Daikatana has a lot of weapons, including the actual Daikatana itself, which is also very lackluster to use. It feels like the game could have done with a lot more playtesting in discovering exactly how these weapons feel to use in the levels they're placed in. Now, I will highlight a weapon which I did enjoy, and that's the Discus of Daedalus, which is basically a giant circular blade that you throw at your enemies and it returns to you, like a boomerang. This was fun to use and carried me through the majority of the second episode. Though what I found even more of a challenge was when the questionable weapon design decisions combined with the questionable level design. I lost track of how many times I died because I was shooting at enemies through an open door and all of a sudden the door closed and my next rocket exploded directly in front of me. Side note, doors seem to stay open for an exceptionally short time, and I'm not even talking about the game's many puzzles, which include pressing a button to open a door and a timer, which is far overused also. Then there's the clipping and physics issues. Throughout my playthrough, I encountered too many game-breaking bugs and physics issues to name. Honestly, I was recording them in my notes, but after the 10th or 11th occurrence, I just stopped noting them. There's everything here from enemies becoming invulnerable when being shot from a particular angle, to your projectile weapons just getting stuck in the air and glitching the game's audio. Oh, and here's a really interesting one. So Daikatana by default includes a limited save system. You collect gems and consume them when you save. Now, I have no issues with this concept. However, after encountering all of the above issues, I needed a way to quick save as I was spending so much time replaying segments after dying, arguably by no fault of my own. And guess what? There's an option to turn on quick saving. So I turned it on and went back to my game, and it crashed. I reloaded again, and it crashed. I then rebooted my PC, and it still crashed. The only way I could get the game not to crash was to turn the option for limited saves back on. Wonderful. Now, one of the things that Daikatana marketed heavily was its companion system. Basically, you have one or more companions at select times in the game, which follow you in combat and can be used in solving puzzles. Again, what sounds like a good idea is executed in a very questionable manner. Firstly, the pathing or ability for your companions to follow you is broken. I'm not going to say it's questionable here because there can be no question, it is broken. Again, I lost track of how many times my companions would just get stuck, necessitating lengthy sequences of issuing them instructions and trying to force clip them out of where they were stuck. I probably spent over 20 minutes at one point in time trying to get one of my companions to climb down a ladder. There's a few sections where you need to leave your companion behind for you to progress before meeting them up with later. Again, sounds like a fair mechanic, but the execution is random to say the least. So many times, my companion would just die while away from me, in most cases to a single low-level enemy, despite the fact they were armed. If I had to take a guess, I would say that they are somehow animation locked to not attack when you're separated from them, but can be attacked themselves. Of course, when any of your companions die, you return to your last save, which depending on how many save crystals you've been able to find, might be some time ago. Can you see how this could become frustrating? The other challenge with the companions are they won't pick up health or weapons by default, so you need to tell them to pick these things up to stay alive. The challenge is that if you yourself are low on health, you need to prioritize your companions because of their lack of AI. Don't get me wrong, I don't mind the system here, it's resource management, but when you need to over-rotate on providing health to your companions because you know they can't defend themselves despite you doing all the work, that's not resource management, that's just compensating for questionable design. Then there's the RPG elements, and look, I don't have as much of an issue with the actual RPG elements as I do with how they're presented in the overall UI. Navigating in-game between weapons, items, companions, and the RPG elements is not very cohesive, and it's not very well explained in the manual or in the game, necessitating in my case a Google search just to understand how to use it. Having a dedicated RPG system, instead of trying to blend it into the default UI, I feel would have delivered a much better experience to the player. And to be fair, the system itself is fine. As you progress, you effectively earn skill points which you can buff attributes, but it needed to be presented far clearer and better explained for people to be able to truly embrace it. Graphically, the game is a mix. There are elements which look really good, the Athens level comes to mind here, and there are levels which don't look very good. Some of the earliest levels come to mind here. The art style is varied between the overarching episodes, owing to them being in different time periods. But honestly, it feels like completely different designers came up with the different episodes. I don't have any proof of this, but the levels and art direction just feel very different. Whether or not that's a good or bad thing, I don't know, but it's certainly an observation. Sound is okay, it's nothing overly memorable, but it wasn't something that bothered me. All said and told, Daikatana is an interesting game. It's a mashup of a lot of game styles, systems and mechanics, but none of them feel well integrated with one another. Remember those Sega Tower of Power memes? That's Daikatana, a disjointed game full of segregated systems often competing for overarching objectives. I honestly feel like the root cause of many of the game's bugs are because of these segregated systems and lack of overall cohesion. Now, I have to give the developer credit here because they released the source code in full to the community many years ago, and the community created a new patch dubbed 1.3, which addresses many of the bugs I've mentioned here, as well as offering modern graphical options such as widescreen. I'll drop a link for this patch in the notes of this video, and I do want to acknowledge the very hard work that the community's put into this. Well, now that we've had another look at the game, we can finally answer the question we set out to. Daikatana, was it really that bad? Yes, it was when it initially released, but thanks to the community and patch 1.3, it's certainly a lot more playable in modern times. But that's enough from me. Do you agree or disagree with my opinions? Let me know down in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching.